Before the story begins, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Out here, every place has a story. Tonight, you're about to step into one that begins with a single knock of fate on a lonely cabin door. The sun was sinking behind the ridge when Jonah Reich rode into the yard. The last light of day spilling across the dry valley in a pale, steady glow. His horse moved slow and patient beneath him, breath misting in the cooling air, and Jonah felt the familiar ache in his shoulders from carrying traps since early morning. All afternoon he had expected the usual silence, the kind that always welcomed him home after days spent alone. The stillness had been his companion for so long it no longer felt empty. But something near the cabin door caught his eye before he even reached the hitch. Rail, tracks, light, uneven, desperate Jonah stayed in the saddle a moment longer, forcing his heartbeat to settle before he leaned forward to look closer. The prints were not made by a man. They were too narrow, too scattered, as if someone had stumbled, catching themselves again and again. A smaller set followed close behind, tiny steps pressed shallow into the dirt. He saw where knees had sunk into the ground, one deeper than the other, as if someone had lowered themselves slowly and remained there for some time. Jonah swung down from the horse, boots landing quietly. He held the reins loose as he crouched, running 2 fingers along the edge of a footprint. The shape told him enough. A woman, a small child, exhausted, likely starving. A pull formed deep in his chest, not fear, but a weight of concern that slowed his breathing. The cabin door stood slightly open, just enough to catch the dying light. That door never stayed open unless he left it that way, and Jonah always checked it twice before riding out. His hand found the butt of his holstered revolver by habit, though he didn't draw it. Not yet. He took one slow step toward the door, then another inside. The room lay dim, the last sliver of daylight slipping across the worn floorboards. The fire in the stove had fallen to faint orange coals. At first he saw nothing. Then his eyes adjusted. A woman stood in the corner near the wall, her back partly turned. A child clutched tight against her chest. Her clothes were torn, her shoulders trembling with exhaustion. She turned at the sound of his step, and Jonah caught the look in her eyes. Fear that had been building for days, maybe weeks, held back only by the small weight she protected. Jonah froze, not out of fear, but so she wouldn't. The woman swallowed hard, her throat working as if each breath scraped on the way down. Her voice came thin, cracked by thirst. "Please, my daughter. She needs food." Her gaze never left him. Her arms tightened around the little girl, whose head rested limp against her shoulder. The child looked no older than 4. Jonah saw how shallow her breaths were, how close to fading she seemed. The woman shifted her feet slightly, adjusting the girl's weight, though her own legs shook. "I can offer myself," she went on, barely audible, "if you feed her." Something heavy settled in Jonah's chest, sharp and immediate. Not suspicion, not anger, awareness of how far desperation had driven her. He didn't step closer. He didn't reach for her. He lifted his left hand slowly, palm open, showing her he meant no harm. "No," he said, voice low, steady. "Not that. Your girl eats. Both of you eat. That's all." He saw confusion cross her face first, then disbelief. Fear didn't leave her, but it shifted, loosening just enough for her to take a breath that didn't shake as badly. Jonah walked to the table at an unhurried pace, keeping space between them as he set down what food he had from earlier. A heel of bread, a tin bowl of stew, half a boiled potato. The smell rose into the room, warm, real. The child stirred faintly, sensing something. "You can sit," Jonah said quietly. "Let her eat." The woman didn't move at once. Her mind raced behind her eyes. He could see it in the tension of her hands, the way she angled her body to shield the child. She was measuring him, deciding whether she had made a fatal mistake. Jonah stepped back toward the door, giving her room, letting her see every movement he made. Finally, she edged forward. When she lowered herself into the chair, her knees nearly gave. She placed the girl on her lap, hands trembling, so badly she had to steady the child twice before lifting the spoon. The little girl opened her mouth slowly. A small sound left her throat, not quite a cry, not quite relief. Watching them, Jonah felt something shift inside him. He remembered the silence after his wife died, the way it had soaked into this cabin year after year. He remembered the sound of a child breathing, the sound of being needed. He leaned against the doorframe, arms loose, so he wouldn't look threatening. His thoughts formed questions. Where had they come from? Who had hurt them? Were they being followed? He set them aside. For now, there was only this. Let them eat. Let them breathe. Let them be safe for one night. The woman fed the girl in tiny, careful bites, eyes flicking to Jonah at every movement. Jonah stayed still. He didn't rush her. He didn't speak again until the bowl lay nearly empty. "You'll take the bed tonight," he said evenly. Her eyes widened, uncertain. "I'll sleep by the stove," he added. "It's warmer there anyway." Something flickered across her face. Confusion, fear, and beneath it a fragile relief she didn't yet trust. But she didn't refuse. She only pulled her daughter closer and nodded once. Jonah turned to the stove, adding 2 logs and opening the vent so the fire would breathe. As the warmth grew, he listened to the sound of her breathing steady, slow, fragile, but real. He hadn't expected to come home to anyone. He hadn't expected anything inside him to stir again. But someone else breathed under his roof now. And as he settled near the stove, watching the flames catch, Jonah knew nothing in this cabin would ever feel quite the same. The fire burned low but steady, orange light sliding across the floor as Jonah eased himself down near it. He didn't lie back. He kept his eyes open, listening to the soft, uneven breaths from the bed. The woman sat on the edge, daughter cradled close, posture stiff, as if comfort itself might be a trap. Jonah rested his hands on his knees, unmoving. He understood what she was weighing. "You can sleep," he said quietly. "Door's locked. No one's coming in." She didn't answer at once. Her head tilted slightly, studying him in the dim firelight. Her eyes held exhaustion so deep it looked carved there. Finally she spoke. "Why are you helping us?" Jonah drew a slow breath. "Your girl needs rest, food, warmth. That's reason enough." She lowered her gaze, rocking her daughter with care, so gentle it tightened something in his chest. "I'm not taking anything from you," Jonah added. "I meant it." Her fingers moved through the child's hair. "Men don't help for nothing," she whispered. The words weren't bitter. They were learned. Jonah didn't answer right away. He shifted his position, stretching one leg out, settling as if for sleep, showing her he wasn't coming closer. "You won't hear that from me," he said at last. Wind pressed softly against the walls. The fire brightened. After a long while she lay back on the bed, still curled protectively around her daughter, facing the wall. Her breathing slowed. Jonah lowered himself fully onto the blanket near the stove. He stared at the beams overhead, listening to the small sounds of a living room again. Fire, fabric, a child shifting in sleep. Something unfamiliar settled into him. Not comfort, not fear, awareness. Minutes passed before her voice came again, muffled by the blanket. "What is your name?" Jonah turned his head toward the bed. "Jonah Reich." Another silence. "Amaya," she whispered. "My daughter is Ona." He nodded, though she couldn't see. "Rest, Amaya, you're safe tonight." She didn't reply, but he heard her exhale. One long controlled breath. Jonah closed his eyes. He didn't know what morning would bring, but he knew he didn't regret opening the door. Dawn crept slowly over the valley, pale light slipping through the small window and laying soft bars across the floor. Jonah woke before the sun fully rose, habit pulling him from sleep. His back ached from the floor, but he rose quietly, careful not to startle them. He checked the bed first. Amaya lay curled around her daughter, one arm secure around the small waist. Ona's hand rested against her mother's collarbone, fingers loose in sleep. Both breathed slow and even. For the first time since they had entered his cabin, Amaya's face didn't look carved from fear. The tightness had eased. Jonah stood there longer than he meant to. Something in the sight settled him. He stepped outside for water. Frost clung to the grass in the bucket rim. His boots crunched softly as he worked the pump. The motion grounded him. Work always did, control, routine, but his thoughts kept circling the cabin. The thinness of the child's wrists, the way Amaya's voice had cracked. He carried the bucket back inside, set it near the door, and built the fire again. Only then did Amaya stir. Her eyes opened sharp at first, then eased when she saw him by the stove and the door still closed. She checked her daughter, smoothing a hand over her hair. "There's water if you want to wash," Jonah said. "Food soon." She pushed herself upright slowly, muscles stiff. He noticed the hesitation in the way she held Ona. "You can use the basin," he added. "I'll step out." She studied him, then nodded. "Thank you." Jonah went back outside. He stood on the porch, watching frost melt under the climbing sun, rubbing his hands together more from unfamiliar feeling than cold. After several minutes, the door creaked. Amaya stepped out with Ona on her hip, hair damp, wrapped in his blanket. Bruises stood dark on her wrists, now that the dirt was gone. Ona reached sleepily toward Jonah's coat. He watched her. "She seems stronger," he said. Amaya nodded. "She hasn't eaten properly in days." Jonah's jaw tightened. "I'll make something warm." Inside, he stirred oats with dried fruit. The smell filled the room. Amaya sat at the table, daughter on her lap, shoulders finally easing. Jonah set the bowl down. "Slowly," he said. Ona reached for more. Jonah leaned back, watching without crowding. After a moment, Amaya looked up. "You fixed the door," she said. Jonah shrugged. Didn't want cold coming in. She seemed to understand the rest. "Thank you, Jonah." He felt the weight of his name in her voice, careful, real. For the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel meant for one person, and Jonah knew whatever had begun at his door was far from finished. The sun climbed higher, thinning the frost from the ground and warming the cabin walls until the cold retreated into the shadows. After they ate, Jonah stepped outside to split wood, letting the steady rhythm settle his thoughts. The sharp crack of the axe echoed against the hills. Each strike felt like a line being drawn between the life he had known and the one now standing quietly behind him. When he paused to catch his breath, he sensed her before he heard her. Amaya stood in the doorway, Ona on her hip, wrapped in the blanket. The child's eyes followed the axe with open curiosity now, no longer dulled by hunger. "You don't need to help," Jonah said gently. Amaya shook her head. "I want to." He handed her smaller pieces of kindling, and she arranged them in a neat bundle with careful hands. She moved slowly, guarding her ribs, but there was purpose in her motion. When the bundle grew heavy, Jonah reached for it. For a second she stiffened, then released it. Their fingers brushed, cold, uncertain, human. Inside, Jonah stacked the wood by the stove. Amaya set Ona on the bed and picked up the old broom by the door. She swept in quiet strokes, not to make the cabin cleaner, it already was, but to carve a place for herself in it. Jonah mended a loose hinge and oiled the latch. The room filled with small, ordinary sounds that hadn't lived there in years. After a while, Amaya sat near the stove and began stitching the torn seam of her dress. Her needle moved with short, practiced motions. "You did this often," Jonah said. She nodded. "In my village, it made me feel useful." Jonah tightened the last screw and met her eyes. "It still does." Something loosened in her shoulders, just a fraction but enough. The wind eased outside. Ona slid from the bed and crossed the floor on uncertain legs, stopping a few steps from Jonah. She held out the small wooden horse he had carved long ago and left, forgotten on the shelf. Jonah knelt, surprised. She placed it in his palm, then wrapped her small fingers around two of his. It wasn't a smile. It was something quieter. Trust, maybe, or the beginning of it. Jonah swallowed. "Thank you," he said to her, though he wasn't sure why. Amaya watched, one hand over her mouth. Her eyes shone, but she didn't look away. That evening, Jonah cooked what he had left and shared it between them. They ate at the same table. Not close, not distant, just there. When the fire burned low, Jonah added wood. "Winter will be hard," he said at last. "But you don't have to face it alone. You can stay, as long as you need." Amaya didn't answer right away. She looked at Ona, asleep against her side, then at the walls, the door, the fire. At him. "We don't have anywhere else," she said softly. Jonah nodded. "Then this is somewhere." Silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It was full of things neither of them had words for yet. Later, as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared beyond the window, Amaya laid her daughter down and turned toward Jonah. "You opened your door," she said. You didn't have to. Jonah thought of the tracks in the dirt, of the quiet years, of the sound of breathing in the night. Maybe, he replied. But I'm glad I did. Amaya inclined her head, a small, grateful motion. The fire whispered. The valley settled, and in a cabin that had known only one heartbeat for a long time, 3 now kept time together, uneven, fragile, and alive.